My name is Madison. I'm 28 years old. For my entire life, my mother treated me like an asset, not a daughter. I was kept close enough to be useful, but never close enough to count. I kept telling myself she just needed a safety net, that family takes care of family. But the moment that finally broke the illusion came inside a quiet, glass-walled office at my bank. I was applying for my first business loan when the officer slid a printed report across the desk, looked me in the eye, and asked how I planned to manage $142,600 in defaulted credit card debt. My stomach dropped. The room went entirely silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. 8 months of maxed out cards. First-class flights I never took. Luxury bags I never saw. I thought my identity had been stolen by a stranger. I was wrong. When I drove to my mother's house and confronted her, she didn't even look up from her magazine. She just shrugged and said, "I gave birth to you, so your credit rating belongs to me." She thought I would just swallow the debt. She thought she had already won. She had no idea my phone was sitting face down on her kitchen counter, with the bank's fraud department already listening quietly on speaker. What happened next wouldn't just freeze her accounts. It was about to tear open decades of lies and end with a felony charge. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. The hierarchy in our house wasn't something we talked about, but you could see it in the way the furniture was arranged. My mother, Diane, always sat in the high-backed armchair that faced the television and the front door simultaneously. She liked to see who was coming and who was leaving. My father sat on the far end of the sofa, usually with his eyes fixed on a newspaper or a muted golf game. I was the person in the kitchen. I was the one who moved between the rooms, carrying trays, clearing plates, and making sure the peace wasn't disturbed. For years, I worked 2 jobs. By day, I was a junior administrator at a local clinic. By night, I waitressed at a diner 3 miles away. I wasn't working those hours because I loved the hustle. I was working because I had a notebook. It was a worn-out thing with a blue cover and dog-eared pages. Inside, I'd mapped out every detail of a small boutique studio I wanted to open. I'd researched floor plans, wholesale fabric costs, and marketing strategies. That notebook was my future. My mother saw my bank account as a shared family resource. Every time she had a crisis, her hand went out. One Tuesday, I came home after a double shift to find her sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of brochures for a Mediterranean cruise. "Madison," she said, not looking up, "I need you to cover the plumbing repair from last week. It was $400, just leave the cash on the counter." The plumbing hadn't been $400. I had seen the bill on the fridge. It was 85. She was padding the numbers to fund her lifestyle. When I hesitated, she finally looked up. Her eyes narrowed. "I did a lot for you, Madison. I kept this roof over your head when things were lean. $400 is a small price for a mother's peace of mind." I looked at my father. He didn't look up from his paper. "Just do it, Maddie," he whispered. "You know how she gets, don't make a scene." That was his role. He was the silencer. He didn't care about the truth, he just cared about the volume. If I yielded, the house stayed quiet. If I asked questions, the house became a war zone. I went to my room, opened my desk drawer, and counted out the cash. Each bill felt like a piece of my studio being torn away. I was the family's unpaid insurance policy. A few days later, I went to the bank. I didn't go to my usual branch. I went to the one downtown where I knew Sarah worked. Sarah had been a regular at the diner for a year. She was a loan officer, a woman who always ordered her coffee black and left a precise 20% tip. She knew about my notebook. We talked about my business plan over late-night omelets when the diner was empty. "I'm ready," I told her, sitting down in her office. "I want to open a separate account, one my mother doesn't have access to, and I want to start the formal application for the business loan." Sarah smiled. It was the first time in months someone had looked at me with genuine professional respect. She took my blue notebook and flipped through the pages. She lingered on the sketches I'd made of the studio layout. "You've done the work, Madison," she said. "This isn't just a hobby. You have real talent for the operational side of this. Your projections are conservative but solid. I think we can make this happen." That was the warmest moment of my year. For 15 minutes, I wasn't a daughter who owed an unpayable debt. I wasn't a waitress with sore feet. I was a business owner. I felt the weight in my chest loosen. I thought I had finally found a way to build a life that belonged only to me. But then Sarah's smile faltered. She opened her computer to start the preliminary credit check. The tapping of her keyboard was the only sound in the room. I watched her face. I saw the moment the color left her cheeks. She looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "Madison," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "When was the last time you checked your credit report?" "I don't have any debt," I said. My voice sounded thin. "I pay for everything in cash. I've never even owned a credit card." Sarah didn't say anything. She just turned the monitor around so I could see the lines of red text. My name was at the top. Underneath, it was a list of accounts I didn't recognize. Platinum cards. Store accounts, personal lines of credit. The total at the bottom was a number that didn't seem real. It was $142,600. I stared at the screen. My brain tried to process the math. I'd been saving $5 tips in a shoe box while someone else was spending six figures in my name. "There's a mistake," I whispered. "The applications were all done online," Sarah said, her voice reaching for a professional tone she couldn't quite hold. "But the billing address. It's your parents' house, Madison." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I thought of the new shoes my mother had bought last month. I thought of the gift she'd given her sister, a designer handbag she claimed she found on sale. I thought of the way she always insisted on checking the mail before I got home from work. I thought I had finally found financial independence, but I didn't know my mother had already found another way to own me. The boundary started with a travel brochure. It was glossy, heavy, and smelled like expensive ink. My mother tapped her long, manicured nail against a photo of a white-domed villa in Santorini. "The early bird special ends on Friday, Madison," she said. She didn't look up from the kitchen island. "I've already picked out the cabin. Deluxe balcony. I need the deposit by tomorrow morning." I stood there with my work bag still on my shoulder, my feet throbbing from the dinner rush at the diner. "I can't, Mom. I told you I'm putting everything into the startup capital for the studio. I'm at my limit." The nail stopped tapping. The silence that followed was heavy and deliberate. My mother slowly closed the brochure and looked at me. It wasn't a look of hurt. It was a look of disbelief, as if the toaster had suddenly refused to toast. "You're at your limit," she repeated. Her voice was dangerously quiet. "I spent 22 hours in labor with you. I worked 3 jobs when your father was laid off in '08 so you could have those dance lessons you insisted on. And now you're telling me you're too busy playing businesswoman to help your mother take one decent vacation." "It's not a vacation, Mom. It's $6,000 for first-class airfare alone," I said. "That's my security deposit for the lease. That's my equipment." "It's greed," she snapped, standing up. "That's what it is. You've grown cold, Madison. You've let a little bit of savings turn you into someone I don't recognize. You're abandoning this family for a dream that will probably fail anyway." She walked out of the room, slamming the door so hard the framed family photos in the hallway rattled. I stood in the kitchen alone, shaking. I had never said no to a major purchase before. Usually, I'd find a way to work extra shifts or dip into my emergency fund. But this time, I stayed firm. I had to. That was the first real crack. 2 hours later, my father called. I was sitting on my bed, staring at my blue notebook, trying to convince myself I wasn't a monster. "Maddie," he said. I could hear him sighing on the other end. "She's been crying for 2 hours. She's got a migraine. Can't you just apologize? You know how she gets about her trips. It's the only thing she looks forward to." "Dad, did she tell you how much it costs? It's my entire savings." "It's just money, honey," he said, his voice weary. "Family is what matters. You only get one mother. Is this really the hill you want to die on? Just tell her you'll make it work. I'll help you out later this year, I promise." We both knew he wouldn't help. He didn't have his own money. She managed his pension as strictly as she managed my guilt. He wasn't asking for a solution. He was asking for me to surrender so he could go back to his quiet sofa. "I'm not paying for the cruise, Dad," I said. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "I'm not." There was a long pause. "Fine," he said, his voice turning cold. "But don't expect things to be easy when you come over for Sunday dinner. You've really hurt her, Madison, deeply." He hung up without saying goodbye. I realized then that my personal boundaries weren't just a financial decision to them. They were a declaration of war. In our family system, my independence was a form of betrayal. I stayed awake that night, staring at the ceiling. I felt a strange mixture of terror and pride. I had finally protected myself. I told myself that the storm would blow over, that they would eventually accept that I was an adult with my own goals. I was wrong. I thought I had protected my money by saying no to the cruise. I didn't realize that by refusing to give her my savings, I had moved her to find a way to take my future instead. That was the night she must have opened the first card. The punishment didn't come as a shout. It came as a slow, freezing wind. Once the cruise deadline passed and I hadn't handed over the money, my phone started buzzing with a rhythm I didn't recognize. It was the sound of a family system correcting a defect. First, it was the commercial space. I had been scouted a perfect little corner unit on 4th Street. The landlord, a man named Mr. Henderson, had been enthusiastic. He liked my business plan. We were supposed to sign the lease on Monday. On Sunday night, he sent a 3-line email. "Upon further review of your financial standing and local references, we have decided to move forward with another tenant. Please do not contact this office further." I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen. Local references. My mother had been friends with Henderson's wife for 20 years. Then came the messages. My Aunt Linda, who usually only texted me on my birthday, sent a paragraph at 11:00 p.m. "Madison, we are all so disappointed in the person you've become. Your mother is a saint for putting up with your arrogance. To brag about your wealth while she struggles is disgusting. Money changes people, but I didn't think it would turn you into a stranger." I tried to reply. I typed out that I wasn't wealthy, that I was working 70 hours a week, that I was just trying to start a business. I deleted it. I realized she didn't want the truth. She wanted to cast the stone my mother had handed her. By Wednesday, the smear campaign had reached the clinic where I worked. I walked into the break room and found 2 of the nurses whispering. They stopped the second they saw me. One of them looked at my shoes, a pair of leather boots I'd saved up for, and rolled her eyes. My mother had told everyone I was a selfish bankrupt who spent every dime on luxury while she couldn't afford a doctor's visit. It was a lie so thick I could almost taste it in the air. I went to my mother's house that Friday, hoping to end it. I brought my bank statements. I wanted to show her the numbers. I wanted to prove I wasn't the monster she was describing to the cousins. She wouldn't even let me in the door. She stood on the porch, holding a glass of iced tea, looking through me like I was a pane of glass. "I have nothing to say to a daughter who treats her family like a line item," she said. "Mom, look at these," I said, holding out the papers. "I'm saving, I'm building something. Why are you telling Aunt Linda I'm bankrupt? Why did you talk to Mr. Henderson?" She took a slow sip of her tea. If you can't manage your obligations to your mother, you certainly can't manage a storefront. I'm just helping the community see who you really are. It's for your own good, Madison. Maybe when you fail, you'll finally come home and be a daughter again." She stepped back and closed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I stood on the porch, humiliated. My reputation in our small town was being dismantled piece by piece. My access to the business world was being choked off before I even started. I was being punished for the crime of having a dream that didn't include her. I walked back to my car, my hands shaking. I felt small. I felt like the girl who used to hide in the pantry when the yelling started. I tried to tell myself that as long as I had my savings, I was okay. I had saved my money from her reach. That was the second lie I told myself. I didn't realize that while I was defending my front door, she had already climbed through the back window of my life. My anger kept me afloat for a few more days, until a letter arrived in a plain white envelope that completely pulled the rug out from under me. The rejection from the Small Business Grant Committee didn't arrive by email. It came in a thick, heavy envelope that felt like a brick in my hands. I remember standing by my mailbox, the late afternoon sun hot on the back of my neck, thinking that the weight of the envelope meant good news. I thought there were contracts inside. I was wrong. The first page was a form letter. The second page was the reason for the denial. It was 2 words, typed in a cold, sans serif font: catastrophic credit. I walked into my apartment and didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor with my back against the refrigerator, the linoleum cold through my jeans. I pulled my blue notebook out of my bag and held it against my chest. This notebook was 3 years of my life. It was every skipped dinner, every double shift, every weekend I spent researching instead of seeing friends. The system had made a mistake. It had to be a mistake. I didn't own a car. I didn't have a mortgage. I had never even walked into a jewelry store. How could I have a credit score that was being described as catastrophic? I felt like an absolute failure. I felt like the world was telling me that no matter how hard I worked, I would never be allowed to leave the kitchen. I would always be the girl carrying the tray, never the woman owning the room. I stayed there on the floor for hours, crying until my eyes burned and the notebook was damp where I'd gripped it. I was 28 years old, and I was financially dead before I'd even lived. I was at the absolute bottom. My reputation was gone, my family had turned their backs, and now my future was being erased by numbers I didn't understand. At 7:45 p.m., my phone vibrated on the floor next to me. I expected another hateful text from a cousin. I almost didn't look. But the screen showed Sarah's name. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to hear her apologize for the rejection, but I picked up anyway. "Madison." Her voice was soft, but it wasn't pitying, it was focused. "I just saw the grant decision hit the system. I've been looking at the full internal audit of the report they used." "I know," I whispered. "I'm a disaster. I don't know how it happened, Sarah." "Listen to me," she said, her voice sharpening. "I've been a loan officer for 12 years. I know what a disaster looks like. A disaster is someone who buys things they can't afford. This is a crime scene. These aren't your debts, Madison. The spending patterns don't match your life. They match someone who is trying to live a life they haven't earned." I stopped crying. I sat up straighter against the fridge. "Come see me tomorrow morning at 7:30, Sarah said. "Before the bank opens. We'll go through every single line of this. We'll figure this out. You're not losing that studio because of this, not on my watch." I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. For the first time in a week, the air in my apartment didn't feel like it was crushing me. "Okay," I said. "I'll be there." I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours cleaning my apartment and organized my notes. I realized that my mother hadn't just taken money. She had taken my identity because she thought I would be too ashamed to fight back. She thought I would just swallow the debt to keep the peace. She forgot that I was the one who had spent 3 years learning how to build something from nothing. I knew how to read a balance sheet, and I was about to read hers. I wiped my face, put my blue notebook in my bag, and waited for the sun to come up. I walked into the bank the next morning not as a victim, but as someone who needed answers. And I knew Sarah was waiting with the key. The lie didn't just stay in the family, it became the atmosphere of the town. In a place where everyone knows your name, they also think they know your bank balance. Within 3 days, the version of the story my mother had crafted, that I was an irresponsible, luxury-obsessed failure who was hiding from her debts, was the only version that existed. I felt it the moment I walked into the venue for my aunt's 25th anniversary party. It was a rented hall downtown, smelling of floor wax and cheap lilies. When I opened the double doors, the room was a sea of familiar faces. These were the people who had watched me grow up, people who had tipped me at the diner for years. As soon as I stepped inside, the volume in the room didn't just drop, it died. My cousin Becky, who was holding a tray of champagne, made eye contact with me and then immediately turned her back, nearly colliding with a waiter. I saw my Uncle Peter whisper something to his wife, and they both shifted their chairs so they weren't facing the door. It was the physical choreography of a boycott. I wasn't directed to the main family table near the stage. Instead, a younger cousin pointed me toward table 14, tucked in the back corner near the kitchen service door. I was seated between two 10-year-olds and a retired neighbor who couldn't remember my name. From that distance, I had a perfect view of the real family. At the head table, my mother was the center of the universe. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, navy silk that caught the light, and she was holding a brand new Chanel bag on her lap like it was a holy relic. She was holding court, gesturing with a glass of expensive wine. "It's just so heartbreaking," I heard her voice carry over the music during a lull. "You try to raise them with values, but some people are just born with a hole in their pocket. I've tried to bail her out, but at a certain point, you have to let them hit rock bottom." My Aunt Linda patted her hand. "You're too good to her, Diane, you really are." I sat there, staring at my plate of cold chicken. I felt like a ghost at my own funeral. I looked at the luxury bag on her lap, then looked at my hands. I thought about the transaction dates Sarah had mentioned on the phone. The most recent one, a $4,000 charge at a high-end boutique, was dated exactly 3 days after I had refused to pay for her cruise. I realized then that the bag wasn't just an accessory. It was a trophy. She had bought it with my future to punish me for the audacity of trying to have one. She wasn't just spending my money, she was spending my reputation to buy herself the role of the long-suffering martyr. The relatives looked at me with pity or looked away with disgust. I was the cautionary tale. I read my new status in the way the server didn't bother to refill my water. I was the irresponsible daughter. But as I watched my mother laugh and tuck a stray hair behind her ear, I remembered something Sarah had said. The IP addresses for the credit applications were traced back to her house. My house. I stopped feeling small. I realized that everyone in this room was watching a performance, but I was the only one who had seen the script. They looked at me like a failure, and I let them. I needed them to keep believing the lie for just a few more days. I needed my mother to feel so safe in her victory that she wouldn't see the floor moving beneath her. I stayed for the toasts. I watched my father stand up and talk about honesty and family loyalty. I didn't say a word. I just watched the way my mother gripped that leather bag. That was the last time I would ever play the role they assigned me. I left the party early, slipping out the service door I had been seated next to. As I walked to my car in the dark parking lot, I didn't feel like an outcast anymore. I felt like an investigator. I drove straight home and opened my laptop. I didn't cry. I started a spreadsheet. I was done being the family's safety net. I was going to be their reckoning. The air inside the bank at 7:30 a.m. felt different than it did during business hours. It was quiet, the marble floors echoing with the hum of the vault and the distant sound of a security guard's radio. Sarah was already at her desk. She didn't have a coffee in her hand this time. She had a thick manila folder and a yellow highlighter. "Sit down, Madison," she said. She didn't lead with small talk. She opened the folder. "I spent last night pulling the granular data. The credit bureau reports give you the what, but our internal audit gives us the where and the how." She slid a printout across the desk. It was a list of 8 credit cards, all maxed out. The dates started roughly 18 months ago. The addresses used for the applications were all variations of my parents' home address: Unit A, rear entrance, apartment 1. Little tweaks to bypass duplicate detection systems. "But here's the part that matters," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, steady register. "I tracked the IP addresses used for the online portals. Every single login for the last 6 months came from a residential router registered to Diane and Robert Lawson. And the delivery confirmations for the physical cards, they were all signed for at that front door." I looked at the highlighted lines. $12,000 for a jeweler. $8,500 for a luxury travel agency. $3,000 at a high-end department store. It was a map of my mother's recent good fortune. "She didn't just steal your credit, Madison," Sarah said. "She stole your capacity to ever leave. With this much debt in your name, you'd never qualify for a lease, let alone a business loan. You'd be tethered to that house forever." I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a sharp, cold clarity. This wasn't a mistake or a desperate moment of need. It was a calculated harvest. "What do I do?" I asked. "If I report this, it's my mother. It's a felony, isn't it?" Sarah leaned forward. She reached across the desk and briefly placed her hand over mine. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a lifeline. "I'm not going to tell you what to do with your family, Madison. But as a banker, I'm telling you that this debt is not yours. You didn't sign for it. You didn't spend it. And I won't let you be the one who pays for it." She pulled out a business card. On the back, a name and a direct extension were written in neat ink. "This is Miller. He's the head of our regional fraud department. He's already seen the preliminary data. He told me that if you're willing to make a statement, they can initiate an immediate administrative freeze on all the accounts. It stops the bleeding instantly." But we both knew a freeze wasn't enough. My mother would just find another way, or she'd play the victim until I caved. "We need more than a freeze," I said. "I need her to admit it. If she admits it on the record, the bank can't be accused of making a mistake and the police have a closed case." Sarah nodded. "Miller said the same thing. He's willing to coordinate. If you can get her to confirm the debt is hers while the bank is on the line, we can clear your name in 48 hours. But you have to be the one to walk into that room." I looked at the card. I thought about the way my mother had looked at me at the party, draped in silk bought with my ruined future. I thought about the blue notebook in my bag. "I have backup now," I whispered. "You have the whole bank behind you," Sarah said. "And you have me. I've already flagged your business loan application. It's not rejected, it's pending investigation. The moment this is cleared, I'm pushing it through to the final board." I stood up. I felt a weight on my shoulders, but it wasn't the weight of debt anymore. It was the weight of a plan. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going into a confrontation with my mother armed only with my hurt feelings. I was going in with the institutional power of a federal banking system. Sarah walked me to the door. 3 days, Madison, that's the window. Can you do it?" "I'll do it," I said. That was the moment the ally activated. I wasn't alone in the kitchen anymore. I had the truth, I had the data, and I had a woman who believed in my business enough to fight for it. I walked out into the morning sun and felt the first real breath of air I'd taken in years. Confirming the leverage felt like assembling a weapon in the dark. I spent the next 48 hours doing something I should have done years ago, I looked at my mother's life through the lens of a balance sheet rather than a daughter's eyes. I started with her social media. For months, I had scrolled past her posts with a dull sense of resentment, but now I was looking for proof. I created a split screen on my laptop. On the left, the bank's list of fraudulent charges. On the right, her Facebook and Instagram timelines. The dates were a perfect match. October 14th, a $3,200 charge at Azure Travel. October 16th, my mother posts a photo of a first-class lounge menu with the caption, "Finally treated myself to the trip I deserve. Hard work pays off." November 22nd, a $1,100 charge at a high-end electronics store. November 24th, a video of my father unboxing a brand new 65-inch curved screen TV. My mother's voice in the background says, "I just wanted my Bobby to have the best view for the game." The evidence was undeniable. Every time I had said no to her, she had simply used my name to say yes to herself. She wasn't even hiding it. She was just relying on my silence. She believed I would never check my credit because she had spent 28 years convincing me that I was lucky just to have a roof over my head. I called Miller, the head of the fraud department, on Thursday afternoon. "I have the screenshots," I said. "I've matched 32 separate transactions to her public posts. I have the delivery signatures you sent over. What happens if I go through with this? If you obtain a verbal or written admission while we are on the line," Miller said, his voice flat and professional, "the bank treats it as a confirmed identity theft. We move the debt into a secondary recovery account under the perpetrator's name. Your credit profile is purged of those specific trade lines within 48 hours. But Madison, you should know, once we move that debt, we are legally required to file a suspicious activity report with the authorities. This isn't just a bank matter anymore. It becomes a criminal one." I looked at a photo of my mother on my screen. She was smiling, holding a glass of champagne, wearing a necklace I now knew cost 4 months of my rent. A wave of doubt hit me. If I did this, she would face a felony charge. She would likely go to prison. The family would be destroyed. My aunts and cousins would never speak to me again. My father would be left alone in a house they couldn't afford without my credit padding their lifestyle. I thought about just filing for bankruptcy. I could start over. It would take 7 or 10 years, but I could rebuild. I could let her keep the money and the bag and the saintly mother reputation, and I could just slink away. Then I picked up my blue notebook. I looked at the page where I had calculated the cost of the industrial sewing machines I needed. I saw the coffee stain from the night I had worked until 3:00 a.m. to finish the marketing plan. If I filed for bankruptcy, I wasn't just losing my credit. I was losing my life's work. I was paying for her luxury with my labor. I was letting her steal a decade of my future so she could have a deluxe balcony on a cruise. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. I wasn't the one destroying the family. She had destroyed it the moment she decided my identity was her property. "I'm ready," I told Miller. "I'll be at her house tomorrow morning at 10. "We'll be on the line," Miller said. "Just put the phone down, keep the volume low, and get her to confirm the cards are hers. We'll do the rest." I hung up. The doubt was gone, replaced by a cold, strategic focus. I wasn't a victim waiting for a miracle anymore. I was a business owner protecting her assets. The leverage was confirmed. The trap was set. All I had to do was walk into the kitchen one last time. The night before, I didn't sleep. I sat in my darkened living room and practiced the motion of laying my phone face down on a surface. I did it over and over until it looked natural, like a tired person just putting their burdens aside. I checked the voice recorder settings. I checked the speakerphone volume. I had a link sent from Miller at the bank's fraud department, a secure bridge that would allow them to listen in real time once I tapped a specific notification. Everything was ready. The inevitability of it felt like a heavy weight in my stomach. At 8:30 a.m., a text came through from my mother. It was condescending, written with the breezy confidence of someone who thinks they've already won the war. I hope you've come to your senses, Madison. Being angry is exhausting and it won't pay your bills. Dad and I just bought the tickets for the Bahamas trip. We're leaving next Tuesday. Come over for breakfast so we can put this unpleasantness behind us. Love, Mom. She was still spending. Even with me bankrupt in her eyes, she was doubling down on the luxury. She really believed she could just keep riding my credit into the sunset and I would be too broken to stop her. I didn't reply. I drank a cup of black coffee, checked my bag for my blue notebook, and walked to my car. When I pulled into their driveway, the house looked the same as it always had: neatly trimmed hedges, a fresh coat of paint on the porch, a suburban sanctuary built on a foundation of stolen air. My father was out front, watering the hydrangeas. He waved at me, a tentative, hopeful little gesture. He wanted things to be normal again. He wanted the silence back. "She's in the kitchen," he said as I walked up. "She's in a good mood, Maddie, just try to keep it light, okay?" "I'll try, Dad," I said. I stepped inside. The smell of bacon and expensive candles filled the air. My mother was sitting at the island, flipping through a high-end home decor magazine. She looked rested. She looked like a woman without a care in the world. "There she is," my mother said, not looking up. "I knew you'd be back. Hunger always brings the stray cats home, doesn't it?" She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about the studio. She just assumed I was there to surrender. She leaned back, tapping a pen against her chin, already looking at a layout for a $5,000 sofa. "I have a few things to settle first," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of the administrator I was at the clinic, not the daughter she expected. I walked over to the counter and placed my phone face down next to her magazine. I felt the slight vibration as Miller's department connected to the line. The trap was open. "We need to talk about the numbers, Mom," I said. She sighed, finally closing the magazine. She looked at me with that familiar, weary pity. "Oh, Madison, still obsessing over the small stuff. Let it go. We're family. We're moving forward." She had no idea. She thought she was in control of the room, the conversation, and my life. She didn't realize the walls were already closing in. "Numbers, Madison?" my mother asked, her voice light with mock confusion. She didn't look up from the magazine. "I told you, I'm not talking about that boutique project anymore. It's a dead end." "I'm not talking about the boutique, Mom," I said. I pulled a chair out and sat across from her. I kept my movements slow and deliberate. "I'm talking about the $142,600 in defaulted credit card debt under my name. I'm talking about the 8 accounts opened from this kitchen table." The room went entirely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. It was that same silence from the bank office, but now the glass walls were the ones she had built around her own life. My mother didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She slowly turned a page in her magazine, smoothed the glossy paper with her palm, and finally looked me in the eye. "I gave birth to you," she said, her voice flat and cold. "So your credit rating belongs to me." She said it with such absolute conviction that for a split second, the old Madison, the girl who carried the trays, wanted to apologize for bringing it up. She looked at me like I was a rebellious employee questioning a CEO. "It's an unpayable debt, Madison," she continued, leaning forward. "I spent decades building a life for you. If I need to use your name to keep this family living decently, that is my right. You're young. You have time to rebuild. But I am your mother, and I won't be questioned in my own home." "It's identity theft, Mom. It's a felony," I said. My voice was trembling, but I didn't pull away. She laughed. It was a sharp, jagged sound. "Who are you going to tell? The police? You'd put your own mother in handcuffs over some plastic and a few trips. Don't be melodramatic. You'll just swallow the debt like you always do. You're a Lawson. We take care of each other." She thought she had already won. She thought the family myth was a cage I couldn't break out of. Behind her, the screen door creaked. My father walked into the kitchen. He was carrying a watering can, his brow wet with sweat. He stopped 3 feet away, his eyes moving from my mother to the phone lying face down on the counter and then to me. He had heard it all. He had heard the confession. "Diane," he whispered. His voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Not now, Robert," my mother snapped, not even looking at him. "Madison is just having one of her little episodes. She thinks she can lecture me on finances." My father looked at me. For the first time in my life, he didn't look at his newspaper. He didn't look at the floor. He looked at my face, and he saw the ruin there, the 3 years of double shifts, the gray circles under my eyes, the blue notebook that represented a dream his wife had set on fire. He looked at my mother, then back at me. I saw the moment he recalculated 40 years of marriage. He realized this wasn't just a family squabble. It was a federal crime, and it was his daughter's stolen future. "She's right, Diane," my father said. His voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. My mother froze. Her hand hovered over the magazine. "What did you say?" "It's her life," he said. "You took her life." He didn't yell. He didn't defend her. For the first time, the silent peacemaker chose a side. He slowly backed away from the island, his eyes never leaving my mother's pale face. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum. He left her alone in the room she had dominated for 3 decades. My mother's face went from a triumphant mask to a sickly, ashen white. She sensed the shift in the air. I reached out and picked up my phone. I turned it over and tapped the screen. The call was still active. "Did you hear all that?" I asked. The inspector's voice, Miller, came through the speaker, crisp and professional. "We have the full admission, Madison. The recording is time-stamped and mapped to the residential IP. We're moving forward with the fraud affidavit and the criminal referral immediately." My mother dropped the magazine. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The Chanel bag on the counter, the one bought with my ruined credit, suddenly looked like a piece of evidence. You recorded me." She whispered. "The bank recorded you, Mom," I said. I stood up and tucked my phone into my pocket. "I just gave them the phone." An hour later, 2 police cars parked outside the house. They didn't use sirens, but the blue and red lights reflected in the glass-walled office of the kitchen. As the officers walked up the path, I stood on the sidewalk and watched my father sit on the porch steps, his head in his hands. The lie was broken. The room was empty. And for the first time in 28 years, the debt was no longer mine. The debts didn't disappear overnight, but the weight of them did. It took 6 weeks of paperwork, 3 meetings with the bank's legal team, and a formal deposition to purge the $142,600 from my name. Every time a line of red text turned black on Sarah's monitor, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my own skin. The social fallout was exactly what I expected. My Aunt Linda sent one final text calling me a traitor to my own blood before blocking me. The cousins stopped whispering because they stopped looking at me entirely. To them, the crime wasn't that my mother stole my life. The crime was that I didn't let her keep it. My mother is currently awaiting trial. She's out on bail, staying with her sister, and still telling anyone who will listen that she's the victim of a technological misunderstanding. She hasn't called me. I don't think she ever will. In her mind, an asset that fights back is no longer a daughter. My father stayed in the house for a month before he realized he couldn't afford the property taxes without the credit lines my mother had been opening. He sold the place and moved into a small apartment near the clinic where I work. We have lunch sometimes. He usually just talks about the weather or his new neighbors. He never mentions my mother. We sit in a silence that isn't heavy anymore, just quiet. He finally stopped trying to keep the peace and started trying to find it. Today, I'm standing in a space that smells of fresh paint and possibilities. It's the corner unit on 4th Street. Mr. Henderson called me personally to apologize after the news of the felony charges hit the local paper. He offered me the lease at a discount. The morning sun is pouring through the large front windows, hitting the hardwood floors. I have my first rack of fabric samples set up near the back. Sarah was my very first visitor this morning. I didn't let her pay for her coffee, and I didn't let her talk about loans. I just showed her the sketches from my blue notebook, which is now sitting on my new mahogany desk. My phone is lying on the counter right now, its face up. The screen is bright, showing a notification for a new order. I don't have to hide it. I don't have to record anyone. I don't have to wonder who is listening. I looked at my credit report one last time this morning. My score is back in the green. It's just a number, but to me, it looks like a front door. I'm finally home. Would you have forgiven your mother and just paid off the debt for the sake of family peace, or would you have let the police put her in handcuffs? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know if I'm the only one who thinks family shouldn't be a debt you can never pay off. If this story resonated with you, check out my other video about a girl whose sister decided to announce her pregnancy in the middle of someone else's wedding vows. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.